All right, welcome to Sunday School. We're picking back up with the Isaac narrative. We've just finished the Abraham cycle. Abraham has died. We've heard the genealogy of Ishmael. Abraham was 175. And then we pick up with this birth narrative of Isaac's children. As we'll see as we read today, there isn't a lot about Isaac. We get a couple stories. And they feel like reruns, and we'll talk about that. But most of Isaac's material is setting up the Jacob narrative, which is going to be a very extended narrative, and we'll see why as this goes. So I'm going to begin verse 19 of chapter 25. These are the descendants of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham was the father of Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he married Rebekah, daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean of Paddan Aram, sister of Laban the Aramean. Isaac prayed to the Lord for his wife because she was barren, and the Lord granted his prayer, and his wife Rebekah conceived. Now, let me just pause here for a second. Remember how we talked about these kind of type scene narratives where you come to the well and you're like, oh yeah, this is going to be one of those stories where the guy's going to find his spouse. In that same vein, when we read through scripture, this type scene of the barren woman will have a great child. And it's fun when I would do a year-long course, right, with students, and we're reading a lot and all. And I remember by the time we were into First Samuel, and all of a sudden they're reading about Elkanah and Hannah and Penina, and all of a sudden talks about a barren wife. And the student, just on his own, the student just said, well, she's going to have somebody important. And I'm like, oh, yes, thank you. And so this is one of those types of narratives which you begin to understand as you're reading through. And again, as far as like, remember, we talked about the turning the story on its head. If barren women end up conceiving and have great children, how much the more, as the rabbis say, when we get to the Gospels and we have a virgin who produces the greatest child of all, right? If you think barrenness is hard to overcome, this woman's a virgin, but look, it births the very Son of God. So anyway, she's barren. So this is the setup. We're like, okay, here we go. So he prays that she would conceive. Verse 22, the children struggled together within her, and she said, if it is to be this way, why do I live? So she went to inquire of the Lord, and the Lord said to her. Now, there's a very famous passage, but I want to like turn it on its head a little bit. Two nations are in your womb, and two peoples born of you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other. The elder shall serve the younger. All right. Now we all know this prophetic word. But I want to caution us in our reading of this narrative that when we translate, we sometimes translate in ways based on what we know is going to happen. What most people don't realize, and it never comes through in our Hebrew translations, is this second half of this prophetic word is ambiguous. Remember the old stories of the oracle at Delphi, right? And they would think they knew what the oracle meant, and then something would happen. It was almost like funny, like it turned it on its head, and it's like, oh, that's what you meant. This is how this passage functions, but because traditionally it's always been translated this way, we don't get the complexity of the story. If we could all read Hebrew and I like laid it out, I'll explain to you how this should be read. The first part, two nations are in your womb. The two peoples born of you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other. Up to that point, we're all good. It's this last line. In Hebrew, you can in English, we understand grammar by word order, right? It's subject, then verb, then object. In Hebrew, you typically have verb first, then subject, object. But when you have a direct object, there's this little particle. It's just the word et, like imagine et, et. And Hebrew will put that before the direct object. So you will be clear what subject, what's object, what's indirect object. That et passage does, that et word does not occur in this last line. So if you're reading Hebrew and this passage stood on its own and there was nothing else around it, you could read it two ways. Two nations are in your womb. The two peoples born of you shall be divided. The one shall be other. And it could then say what we have here, the elder shall serve the younger, or it could say the elder, the younger shall serve him. It could say either one of those things. All right. So it's either the elder shall serve the younger, or the elder, the younger shall serve him. But what we're going to see as this story transpires is both parents heard something different in the ambiguity. Because one is going to try to set up so that, according to cultural expectations, Esau would be the one to receive the birthright and the blessing. And the other will see that Jacob would receive it. But sometimes I hear these sermons or read commentaries about, one wouldn't listen to the word of God and they were too stuck in their cultural traditions. And Rebecca was more open to what God was saying. In the context, you don't know what God is saying, which I think is something we should all think more about. Anyway, so this statement sits out there at the front. When her time to give birth was at hand, there were two twins in her womb. The first came out red, all his body like a hairy mantle. So they named him Esau. Afterwards, his brother came out with his hand gripping Esau's heel, so he was named Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when she bore them. Now their names are significant. So the name Esau is related to hairiness, and Jacob means supplanter or heel grabber. And so you get this picture of these two twins wrangling around inside of her, and then it's the race to who gets to be in front. And it's a little bit cartoonish when you think of this like red hairy baby coming out, right? He's like little Sasquatch. And then you get Jacob coming out who's grabbing at his heel as if he wants to pull him back in and get out first. All right, so this is their birth story. This is how it starts. And now we're going to see this kind of develop. And like I always tell you, the economy of Hebrew language, they are not wasting words. So all this stuff, the red, the hairy, Esau as a name, heel gripping, all these things are going to come into the story. When the boys grew up, Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field, while Jacob was a quiet man living in tents. Isaac loved Esau because he was fond of game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. All right, so here's the setup to our story, and everything is going to kind of play out of this. Any questions about this? Again, it's a very famous passage, but I think the key that kind of turns it on its head a little bit is that there's ambiguity in the prophetic word. Everybody good to move on? All right, so here's the first story we know of. Like these are good Sunday school stories now. So we're going to have these in the back of our heads already, but it's seeing how these fit into this broader narrative. Once when Jacob was cooking stew, right, because he's kind of the homebody who hangs around the tents, Esau came in from the field and he was famished. Esau said to Jacob, "Let me eat some of that red stuff, for I am famished." Therefore, he is called Edom or Edom. Now, the Hebrew word for red is the same word as Edom, the country. Now, Esau is going to become like the start of the Edomite peoples, right? So if this were a cartoon, we'd call him Big Red. And then he's going to turn into the red people, which are the Edomites. Probably because when you're in, for those of us who have been in Israel, when we were like at the Dead Sea, you're looking over at Jordan. Edom is now part of Jordan. When the sun's coming down, those hills along what was then Edom and Moab, it has kind of a red hue to it. Whether that's related to where the name comes from or not, we don't know. So Esau says, or Jacob says to him, first sell me your birthright. Now, two things are going to happen in these stories. There's birthright and there's blessing. Birthright is based on primogeniture. Who is born first gets a double portion of the inheritance. That's birthright. So you just have two children. So that would mean when it was time to inherit the possessions of Isaac, if there were two children, it would be divided into three parts, and the person with the birthright gets two. All right. If there's 7 kids, they divide it into 8, and the firstborn would get 2 parts. All right. So that's what we're talking about here. So it's a big deal when you only have 2 children, right? So he's about to die. What use is a birthright to me, right? So they show him as this kind of the big, simple guy. And he's like, I'm just really, really hungry. So who cares about all that? I just need something to eat because I'm going to die. So Jacob says, swear to me first. So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew, and he ate and drank and rose and went his way. Thus, Esau despised his birthright. So we get this picture of the two of them. Esau is kind of like big, simple hunter man. Jacob is this kind of wily, hangs around by the tents, but he's always plotting, right? He's always grabbing the heel. He's always looking to supplant. So he said, okay, I don't get the birthright. I didn't come out first, but now I just came up with a nice plan, and I just tricked my brother out of it. All right. So this is the beginning. And now we're going to have an interlude in that story. So any questions about Jacob Esau? Because now we're going to get one of our reruns. Wife, sister, one more time, right? You're like, oh my gosh, we've already had 2 of these. Well, it gets passed on to the next generation. And this is my favorite one because it's got more humor in it. And it's slightly inappropriate, but we missed that in the translation too. Now there was a famine in the land, besides the former famine that had occurred in the days of Abraham. And Isaac went to Gerar to King Abimelech of the Philistines. Okay, this is a repeat character. This ruse already got pulled on Abimelech once. All right, Abraham did the whole, hey, this is my sister deal. All right, so next generation. The Lord appeared to Isaac and said, do not go down to Egypt, settle in the land that I will show you. Reside in this land as an alien, and I will be with you and will bless you. And for to you and your descendants, I will give all these lands, and I will fulfill the oath that I swore to your father Abraham. So we see the same blessing that came to Abraham back in Genesis 12. It's like being repeated. And this is applying to you too, Isaac. I will make your offspring as numerous as the stars of heaven, and I will give your offspring all these lands. And all the nations of the earth shall gain blessing for themselves through your offspring. Because Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. Now, just one of those little, this chapter 26, verse 5, has had a lot of commentary written on it. In your mind, you're like, it's just an afterthought, and it seems like the kind of stuff Bible passages say. Because Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. It's anachronistic. Because think about it. When does God give his laws, commandments, and statutes? It's with Moses, generations and generations and generations later. We don't have a law code at this point. We don't have 10 commandments. We don't have the other, right, 613 laws. But in scripture, Abraham is presented as, hey, we might not even formally have the law yet, but he was a good law keeper. It was like this idea that it was the rabbis argue, like it was intuitive. They knew before it was even written that they should keep God's laws. So anyway, I just wanted to point that out because normally it just sounds like good Bible talk. But when you look at it in the course of the story of the Bible, they don't have a law code yet, which was similar to that story with Abimelech. Remember? I mean, with Melchizedek, where it said they tithed, they gave the 10%. Well, that becomes a category that we know of officially from the time of Moses. But it was like they knew what to do even back then. Anyway, just an aside. So
Hey,
Isaac settling Gerar.
Dean, I got a question.
Yeah.
Just to help us with a timeline, it was Abraham was about 4,000 BC.
No, Abraham would be the two timelines people give for the patriarchs is that they were either beginning at about 2100 BCE or about 1750 BCE. It all depends on where we put Hammurabi. So Hammurabi in Babylon kind of sets a fixed point in the timeline, and there's a high date and a low date for him. And so based on where he fits, people kind of move the patriarchs. So in the same way, Moses is usually either dated around 1480 or like 1280, somewhere in there. So let me just get this cat out of here. I don't know if you can hear the cat. Let me just.
I saw something.
All right. So the flexibility of those dates that were probably about 400 to 500 years before Moses comes on the scene.
Okay, then, so these people aren't Jews at that time. They're just God-fearing people.
They're God-fearing people. They're followers of Yahweh. And again, on a strict academic level, I'm not comfortable using the word Jews until the exile 580 downward. Now, people look at the ancient Israelites and call them Jews, but Judaism really is the religion that starts to form in exile once they're away from temple religion. So that's that whole distinction between like Yahwistic religion, like the religion of ancient Israelites and Judites who follow Yahweh, which is the antecedent to what becomes Judaism, but it's really not Judaism as we think about it today.
So they're descendants, they're ancestors of Jews. So I think I don't want to speak others, but I know in my own mind, all these guys were Jews,
right?
But that's not really true.
Correct.
They were ancestors of Jews. And then sometimes we think, well, we're Jews too, until we realize we're not. And so it can become pretty confusing.
Yeah, that was one of the things that just personally that I fully grasped when I went to Hebrew Union College over my time there, is because growing up as a good Christian kid, in my mind, the people of the Old Testament and what Old Testament people did, that was Judaism.
Right.
Well, once you actually understand Judaism, you realize Judaism is a rabbinic interpretation of that stuff. And that's all of its holy writing, part of its holy writing, and it's the way they think about the world, and it's their backstory. But in the same way it is for Christians, right? So for Christians,
right,
part of our backstory, interpret Old Testament through the lens of gospel and New Testament. Judaism is interpreting Old Testament through the lens of the rabbinic, the ancient Jewish fathers, where a lot of that stuff's coming together after the time of Jesus. A little before it, but after as well, right? So there's this whole process of this religious evolution. But it's just simpler usually for people to just go, oh yeah, all those people back there were the Jews and came from Judaism. But they should, just like we as Christians, go, okay, that's really not us, but it leads to us.
right.
Modern Jews should realize that stuff back there, leads to us, but it's really not us at all. No, I shouldn't say at all. That's really not who we are now. Does that make sense?
It does. So could you say that if you look at things strictly in a genealogical way, those were their ancestors. But if you look at as a religious doctrinal way, then there was a time when the people of Yahweh morphed into a lot of different things, and some were Jews.
Yeah, you know what? It's interesting because people whose specialization is early Judaism, when they talk about even what we would call New Testament period, right? So at the beginning, when Jesus is on earth, they would talk about Judaisms. Like you have these different forms of interpreting what Judaism will be. And basically, through the next few hundred years, those all fade away except for Pharisaical Judaism, which becomes what we now call modern rabbinic Judaism. Like that's the branch that survives. But so Christianity then is like related to that, but it's not that right? It doesn't directly come out of Judaism, but it comes out of this mass of religious expressions that are linked to the Judaisms that come out of the exile, that come out of ancient Israelite religion up to that point. Does that make sense?
It does. And the exile you're talking about is not the one in Babylon, but the one in Egypt.
No, in Babylon. It's the Babylonian exile, because if you even look at the earliest, if you look at rabbinic tradition, there's two versions of the Talmud. There's the Bavali or the Babylonian Talmud, and there's the Jerusalemite or the Palestinian Talmud. And actually, the Babylonian Talmud is the more is considered the more I can't think of the word I'm looking for. It's considered the more standard version. So if the two kind of conflict, that Babylonian Jewish community that comes out of exile, most of it stays in Mesopotamia, that's seen as the authoritative Jewish tradition.
So in other words, they went to Babylon as people of Yahweh and came back as Jews.
Right. And if you look in scripture itself, the first time the word Jew is used is in the Daniel story and Esther story, which are exilic stories. Before that, they're Judahites, they're Israelites, and it's just the assumption of what their language, what their religion is the worship of Yahweh. But think about it, that religion centered on temple, on sacrifices, and on priesthood. Well, when you go into exile, temple is destroyed, sacrifices can't be done, priesthood has no meaning. And so this evolution is happening there where this idea of there was a God who was territorial and that he was centered and lived in Jerusalem and that was his home, to the idea of God is everywhere, that you can't, get away from God's power and God's presence. We talk about how in ancient Israel, there was this henotheistic idea that, yes, Yahweh was a great God, but there were other gods out there that he battled and that, people chose between or sometimes worshiped multiple ones. Once you get to Judaism, it is monotheistic. There are no other beings. It's Yahweh alone. He's our only God, and we don't call him by that name anymore. So there are these, it becomes a prayer service. The rabbis become the important leaders of the religious movement. So there's a major shift in Judaism from Yahwism. So good question. But so this idea of this verse 5, the rabbis then, like looking at it in a historical perspective, have wrestled with the interpretation of how could Abraham be doing the thing Moses commands us when it's 400 years or more before Moses. And some say it's because even in his heart, Abraham was so righteous knew what was expected. It didn't have to be written down. It's that idea, like nobody has to tell you a moral code. You just know it. It's written in our hearts. But anyway, good question. All right, back to our wife's sister. So Isaac settled in Gerar, verse 7. When the men of the place asked him about his wife, he said, "She is my sister." For he was afraid to say my wife, thinking, or else the men of the place might kill me for the sake of Rebekah, because she's attractive in appearance. Now, I always wonder in the back of my head, did Abraham like tell the kids the stories of like, hey, here's how I did it when we went abroad? Or is this kind of like the way Abraham just knew what to do even before the law code was written? Did Isaac just know? It's like DNA wired, like this is how we handle our business when we go abroad. Whichever way it was, he follows the exact same path as his father. And the whole, you never show somebody a magic trick twice. Like, okay, you could sneak one by the goalie the first time with Abimelech, but the second time it's like he's ready for these family of Abraham people. So when Isaac had been there a long time, King Abimelech of the Philistines looked out of his window and saw him. Again, the translation here is fondling his wife Rebekah, which sounds a little inappropriate. I don't know what was going on in the streets of Gerar in those days, but whatever happened. Here's the funny part about this. So, did any of you grow up reading the King James Bible? Okay, the King James Bible here, this one makes me laugh even more. It said, he looked out the window and he saw him making sport with his wife, which I always wonder, like, what were they, like throwing the Frisbee? Like, what were they doing? But whatever they were doing, it was it was enough for him to realize, hey, they're not brother, sister. If we were reading this in Hebrew, this is why this is so great. It literally says, when he looks out the window, he saw him, meaning Isaac, he saw him Isaacing his wife. Remember how the word Isaac means to laugh, can mean to mock. They didn't know what to do with how do you say he was Isaacing his wife? So like it's making sport, it's having fun. So they were laughing. So there's nothing about this word that means fondling per se. One translation, I think NIV says caressing. He's doing something that the author uses a word play on Isaac's name to say the king looks out the window, sees him Isaacing with her, and he's like, okay, something's up because that's not brother, sister. All right. In some ways, Abraham and Jacob are going to have these famous stories about how their name gets changed. And people have sometimes said, Isaac never has his name changed. But I've argued before that in some ways, he does throughout these stories. At first, his name was Yitzhak, laughing in a mocking way. When Sarah laughs when she hears that you're going to have a child, and she scoffs, right? You could translate, she was Isaacing, she was scoffing. But then when the baby's born, then it's a positive name because she laughs joyfully, and everyone will laugh with me when they hear this story. So it's almost like a name change in the understanding of the kind of laughing. But then when Hagar and Ishmael are cast out, it's that he was making sport or mocking him, which is another wordplay on his name. It's not laughing in a good way, but it's a way that made Abraham or Sarah uncomfortable and says, get rid of him. And then here again, he's on the run. He's a sojourner, and his name goes back to something that isn't just good old laughing, but it's something that tips them off. So while his name is never officially changed, the meaning of how his name is interpreted seems to waver back and forth throughout the Isaac stories. So he sees this out the window, Isaacing his wife. And Abimelech called for Isaac and said, "So she's your wife. Why then did you say she is my sister?" Isaac said to him, "Because I thought I might die because of her." Once again, the patriarch in unfamiliar territory thinks we're the good guys and these bad people will really cause us harm. Instead, Abimelech says, "What is this you have done to us? One of the people might easily have lain with your wife, and you would have brought guilt upon us." So Abimelech warned all the people, saying, "Whoever touches this man or his wife shall be put to death." So, okay, go back to the Sodom and Gomorrah story, right? This idea of how do you treat guests? How do you show hospitality? The people of Sodom, right? They took it, we're going to take advantage of visitors. Here you have the king going, "Look, don't anybody bother this man or his wife. He has this high moral standing that says, why would you set a trap that we might morally fail?" And Isaac's like, "Well, I knew the kind of people you must be. So I was going to like try to save myself before you terrible people try to kill me." And so we get this appearance versus reality of how Isaac was perceiving these people would treat him. And in the end, they seem to have a higher moral standard than Isaac himself. So Isaac sowed seed in the land, and the same year reaped 100-fold. The Lord blessed him, and the man became rich. He prospered more and more until he became very wealthy. He had possessions and flocks and herds and a great household, so that the Philistines envied him. And let me stop us here in that in all of these trickster stories, every time this three-part process, you begin inland, you leave your land and you go out into the margins, to wilderness, to something outside the land. There's a change of status, deception happens, and your wealth and status increase. And then when you finally return home, you have this new elevated, raised status. This is the pattern we see in tricksters throughout, and Isaac fits it perfectly. Now there's this parenthetical statement. Now the Philistines had stopped up and filled with earth all the wells that his father's servant had dug in the days of his father Abraham. And Abimelech said to Isaac, "Go away from us. You have become too powerful for us." So Isaac departed from there and camped in the valley of Gerar and settled there. Isaac dug again the wells of water that had been dug in the days of his father Abraham, where the Philistines had stopped them up after the death of Abraham. And he gave them the names that his father had given them. But when Isaac's servant dug in the valley and found there a well of spring water, the herders of Gerar quarreled with Isaac's herders, saying, "The water is ours." So he called the well Esek, because they contended with him. It's a wordplay. Then they dug another well, and they quarreled over that one. So he called it Sitnah. He moved from there and dug another well, and they did not quarrel over it. So he called it Rehoboth, saying, "Now the Lord has made room for us, and we shall be fruitful in the land." Rehoboth it means a room or expanse, and so it's like, look, things are wide open now. From there, he went to Beersheba, and that very night the Lord appeared to him and said, "I am the God of your father Abraham. Do not be afraid, for I am with you and will bless you and make your offspring numerous for my servant Abraham's sake." So he built an altar there, called on the name of the Lord, and pitched his tent there. And there Isaac's servants dug a well. Now notice, this is where the Lord reaffirms that original call of Abraham and blessing on Isaac that says it's being transferred from Abraham to you. Then Abimelech went to him from Gerar with Ahuzah, the advisor, and Phicol, the commander of his army. And Isaac said to them, "Why have you come to see me, seeing that you hate me and have sent me away from you?" And they said, "We see plainly that the Lord has been with you. So we say, let there be an oath between you and us, and let us make a covenant with you, so that you will do us no harm, just as we have not touched you, and have done to you nothing but good, and have sent you away in peace. You are now the blessed of the Lord." So he made them a feast, they ate and drank, In the morning, they rose early and exchanged oaths, and Isaac set them on their way, and they departed from him in peace. That same day, Isaac's servant came and told him about the well that they had dug, and they said, "We have found water." He called it Sheba. Therefore, the name of the city is Beersheba to this day. Beersheba means a well of swearing or well of an oath. So it's like, here's where we swore with them to make peace. So that's why they named it. In the last little line, which again, this is a bigger deal to them than it would be for people here today. But when Esau was 40 years old, he married Judith, daughter of Beeri the Hittite, and Basemat, daughter of Elon the Hittite. And they made life bitter for Isaac and Rebekah. So again, in this world, you're to marry relatives of your clan, your tribe, your people. And so they didn't like the mixing with Hittites. This was a frustration. Okay. So this story shows him in the patriarchal line, but it's really a linking story. It doesn't move the action forward like the Jacob narrative is about to do. But any questions about Isaac and his clear relationship to Abraham and the way you travel?
He married 2 women? Is that?
Yeah, Esau does. Yep. 2 foreigners.
And what is this about getting married at age 40 again?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because for the most part, you would think in the ancient world you're getting married much younger. But that's a good question that we keep getting this 40 number. A lot of times 40 in scripture is like a number of struggle or testing or of a generation. So, right, you have a 40-day flood and you have 40 years in the wilderness. And right, even in the New Testament, you get going out into the wilderness and fasting 40 days. Moses goes up the mountain 40 days. But generations are also typically portrayed as 40 years. So a lot of things in the Bible, like when it's 400, years, it's kind of like going, okay, that was 10 generations. So it may be just a referent of like, all right, the next generation has now taken over. And so he's a 40-year-old man getting married. Or it could just be the way it was a literal, it just happened to be 40 and they all keep finding, but we have no evidence to say 40 was like the magic year to get married. It just keeps coming up here. Good question.
So I feel good about this because in the Schneer tradition, 40 years is our generation. And
Really?
It's been going on for a long time. So my great-great-grandfather was born in Germany, but it was before our Declaration of Independence. So it would go like this. It was February 1776. So it would go 1776, 1823, I think it was 1862, 1903, then me, 1944, and then Keller, 1984. So it averages out to 40, and usually it's right around 40, not much deviation. So
you're like a good biblical family.
For the first time in my life, I think there's biblical precedence for this. So instead of being slow, I think we're biblical. So I'm going to look at it that way.
That's a perfect way to look at it. You're
We're no longer slow.
I love it. All right, so here comes a very interesting and famous story, which is going to set up the whole next. This moves us really into the Jacob narrative, but it begins with Isaac, but in the end we realize it's about Jacob. And again, this story, I just want to set you up so you hear it with the right mind, is littered with humor in my perspective. But again, I get it. Sometimes people feel like if you're a hammer, all the world's a nail, and I find humor in everything. But I think with a little bit of right setup, you're going to see that when this story was told in the ancient world, like They weren't like simpletons. They would have seen the humor in this too. All right, so when Isaac was old and his eyes were dim so that he could not see, he called his elder son Esau and said to him, "My son," and he answered, "Here I am." He said, "See, I am old. I do not know the day of my death. Now then, take your weapons, your quiver and your bow, and go to the field and hunt game for me. Then prepare for me savory food such as I like, and bring it to me to eat, so that I may bless you before I die." So what we have him setting up here is really like this ritual of they're going to eat a meal. He is going to then like pass his blessing on to the next generation. Um, a lot of times these kinds of blessings we see on people's deathbeds. But as Isaac is losing his eyesight and he says, I don't know the day of my death, like just let's do this now. Okay. So again, it would be rightful that the eldest, even though they were twins, that the eldest would get this blessing. And hearing an ambiguous promise of what was to happen, that would not rock his tradition. It would fit and it would make sense. So he's like, let's do this. Now, Rebekah was listening when Isaac spoke to his son Esau. This whole, in my mind, I always think Shakespeare when I read this passage. This is like a great appearance versus reality Shakespearean comedy of errors is the way this story always feels to me. So, you always have that character just off to the edge of the stage who's hearing or who pops up behind a bush and realizes the plan and then figures out how to undermine it. Now, Rebekah was listening when Isaac spoke to his son Esau. So when Esau went to the field to hunt game and bring it, Rebekah said to her son Jacob, "I heard your father say to your brother Esau, 'Bring me game and prepare for me savory food to eat, that I may bless you before the Lord before I die. Now, therefore, my son, obey my word as I command you. Go to the flock and get me 2 choice kids, so that I may prepare from them savory food for your father, such as he likes. And you shall take it to your father to eat, so that he may bless you before he dies.'" So here's the plan to pretend you're Esau, because they know his eyesight's failing. So Rebekah figures we can pull this off. He won't be able to tell the difference. But Jacob said to his mother, "Rebekah, look, my brother Esau is a hairy man, and I'm a man of smooth skin. Perhaps my father will feel me, and I shall seem to be mocking him." Here's our Yitzhak word again. "And bring a curse on myself and not a blessing." His mother said to him, "Let your curse be on me, my son. Only obey my word and go get them for me." So he went and got them and brought them to his mother, and his mother prepared savory food such as his father loved. Then Rebekah took the best garments of her elder son Esau, which were with her in the house, and put them on her younger son Jacob. Okay, and here's where it gets really interesting. And she put the skins of the kids on his hands and on the smooth part of his neck. Then she handed the savory food and the bread that she had prepared to her son Jacob. Now, listen, we've all known people who were a little hairier than the typical person might be. But to think that you are going to imitate the hairiness of Isaac by putting the skin of a freshly killed goat around his neck and on his arms. I mean, we're talking like hairy like a beast, okay? So he has this goat skin, freshly killed, that's going to be over his neck and on his hands and arms. He's wearing Esau's clothing, and now he's going to bring in the food. So again, we're watching this this narrative unfold, and it's like, oh no, is he going to be caught? So he went into his father and said, "My father." And he said, "Here I am. Who are you, my son?" right? He hears them and he probably thinks, just wait, who is this? I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done as you told me. Now sit up and eat my game so that you may bless me. But Isaac said to his son, how is it that you found it so quickly, my son? There's the first question. There's gonna be all these questions. Well, because the Lord your God granted me success. Like, oh, that's a good theologian, right? This is God's plan. Of course it went fast. Then Isaac said to Jacob, come near that I may feel you, my son, to know whether you are really my son Esau or not, right? He's suspicious. Something's not right here. So Jacob went up to his father Isaac, who felt him and said, the voice is Jacob's voice, but the hands are the hands of Esau. He was feeling a goat. And he says, clearly, Esau's on the scene. He did not recognize him because his hands were hairy like his brother Esau's hands. So he blessed him. And he said, are you really my son Esau? And he answered, I am. Then he said, bring it to me that I may eat of my son's game and bless you. So he brought it to him and he ate, and he brought him wine and he drank. Then his father said to him, come near and kiss me, my son. Okay, now it's like he hears him, he's in the room, he can't see him well. Then he touches him. Now he's like, all right, come all the way in for a kiss. So it's this last moment of, is he going to be revealed? So he came near and kissed him, and he smelled the smell of his garments and blessed him and said, ah, the smell of my son is like the smell of a field that the Lord has blessed. He's smelling goat, right? He's smelling the freshly killed goat. And he said, he smells like the field. May God give you of the dew of heaven and of the fatness of the earth and plenty of grain and wine. Let people serve you and nations bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be everyone who blesses you. As soon as Isaac had finished blessing Jacob, when Jacob had scarcely gone out of the presence of his father Isaac, his brother Esau came in from his hunting. He also prepared savory food and brought it to his father. And he said to his father, let my father sit up and eat of the son's game so that he may bless me. His father Isaac said to him, who are you? He answered, I'm your firstborn son, Esau. Then Isaac trembled violently and said, who was it then that hunted game and brought it to me, and I ate it all before you came, and I've blessed him? Yes, and blessed he shall be. When Esau heard his father's words, he cried out with an exceedingly great and bitter cry and said to his father, bless me, me also, father. But he said, your brother came deceitfully, and he has taken away your blessing. Esau said, is he not rightly named Jacob? Remember, supplanter? Is he not rightly named supplanter? For he has supplanted me these 2 times. He took away my birthright, and look, now he's taken away my blessing. Then he said, have you not reserved a blessing for me? Isaac answered Esau, I have already made him your lord, and I have given him all his brothers as servants, and with grain and wine I've sustained him. What then can I do for you, my son? Esau said to his father, have you only one blessing, father? Bless me, me also, father. And Esau lifted up his voice and wept. Now, let me just point one thing out, because for us as Westerners, we kind of have, in some ways, we take lightly spoken words, right? For us, it's written words and contracts that have meaning. So we're like, look, you said it, but just, right? Even as kids, we have this silly idea that someone can say something really mean to you, and then you say, take it back. I always got a kick out of that. Like, if you just said, okay, I take it back. Well, you just said it. How do you take that back? Like, it's been said. I think for us, we have some times in our own culture around words carrying weight greater than we normally think. And one of the best examples is marriage vows, right? It's actually in the saying of I do and I do. There's more than just performance. It's the belief that in the saying something changes. When the minister then says, by the power vested in me, right? By the church of whatever and by the state of Ohio, I pronounce you, man. And it's in the pronouncing. This is the ancient idea of blessing. Like you can't give a blessing and then say, I take it back. And so we saw the same thing potentially in the blessing of Ham. But then in the end, when Ham seems to do something inappropriate, he's not cursed, but his grandson's cursed. This idea, once it's said, it's stuck. So he can't just say, whoops, I blessed the wrong guy. So he has to come up with something different. And then this is the blessing that is not a blessing that comes from Isaac. Isaac answered him, see, away from the fatness of the earth shall your home be, and away from the dew of heaven on high. By your sword you shall live, and you shall serve your brother. But when you break loose, you shall break his yoke from your neck. And here we get the answer to the promise or oath at the beginning that said, who shall serve whom? And we weren't sure. At this point, we realize that the older shall serve the younger brother. Now Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing with which his father had blessed him. And Esau said to himself, the days of mourning for my father are approaching. Then I will kill my brother Jacob. Right? This is a good Godfather moment. Like you can't kill Fredo till after the mom dies. But once the mom dies, all bets are off. So it's like once Isaac is out of the scene, Esau is going to get his brother. But the words of her elder son, Esau, were told to Rebekah. So she sent and called her younger son Jacob and said to him, your brother Esau is consoling himself by planning to kill you. Now therefore, my son, obey my voice. Flee at once to my brother Laban in Haran, and stay with him a while until your brother's fury turns away, until your brother's anger against you turns away and he forgets what you've done to him. Then I will send and bring you back from there. Why should I lose both of you in one day? So wait, how long would you have to wait before Esau will forget this happened? But again, wishful thinking. Then Rebekah said to Isaac, I'm weary of my life because of the Hittite women. Okay, we're jumping all the way back now. She has to have a new reason to send Jacob away. She can't just say he's going to get killed because of the ruse. If Jacob marries one of the Hittite women such as these, one of the women of the land, what good will my life be to me? And so under the pretense of, hey, we need to keep this in the family, just like Isaac sent away or Abraham sent away for Isaac's wife, Jacob needs to go back to the old country to find a spouse, and thus he will do. So this sends us on a trajectory of a really interesting narrative that we'll look at over the next couple of weeks of Jacob and his own struggle to have a wife and to have children. Questions, comments? This is one of those pictures where we see that the Bible story is not this simple straight line forward of a bunch of really good moral people who'd always do the right thing. We sometimes look at people today and church people and we complain that they're all hypocrites and they're not living good moral lives and doing the things we'd expect of them. Well, to use the old expression, that's because we're good biblical folk. And even Bill's family is marrying off having kids every 40 years. So it's like the old line of the book of Ecclesiastes that there's nothing new under the sun finds itself to be more true day in and day out. Again, I think you all know the story, but we're going to find the next series of stories of Jacob and his dealing with Laban and how that story is going to go. It's the trickster story in the Bible. And tricksters don't only trick, but tricksters always get duped. And we're going to get the back and forth of who has the upper hand in these things. And it sounds like, okay, why are we spending all this time in the book of Genesis on this character? Well, remember, when we get to the very end of it, this guy, Jacob, the trickster, the supplanter, the schemer, his name is going to be changed to Israel. He is the eponymous ancestor of the people of whom the whole story of the Bible is told. He's not just some out of the way, crazy character, the nutty uncle that we all tell the funny stories about at the holidays, but you're like, yeah, but that was him. This is the main guy who becomes the main family in the main story that we all count ourselves as part of, right? We are all, look at New Testament, right? That's the way it's, we are all children of Israel. These are our ancestors. These are our stories. And the trickster, the supplanter, the schemer gets a new name. Because what did it say at the beginning of the story, right? I will make of you a great name. He's going to end up with the name Israel. All right.
Dean, I would love to know sometime, whether you recorded or not, how you and Julie chose your sons' names.
Oh, they're all family names.
Oh.
Julie's grandfather is Jacob. And his last name was Hirschman. And so we wanted to use for every child a family name. And it's interesting because Jake's Vietnamese name, and in Vietnamese, you go, right, like many Asian cultures, last name first. His name is Vu Tuan Son, S-O-N. And so we thought we were going to use Vu and have like two middle names, Hirschman, Vu, Nicholas. But I was reading a Vietnamese novel and it mentioned the name Son, which is very popular in Vietnam. And I, because it was confusing, like our word son, S-O-N, seemed like a weird name to give to somebody. But when I found out that it meant mountain, I thought, oh, that's just a powerful name. So we put the son on Jacob. So he is Jacobson Hirschman Nicholas. But being a person also who studied tricksters, when we had a family member named Jacob, I was like, we're using that. It's funny, one of my former students, who actually just got her dissertation published, it's coming out in March. She was one of my Jewish students, and she used to tease me. I taught her Hebrew, and when we had the name for Jake, she would always joke that said, that's gonna be the most Jewish sounding Vietnamese kid ever, with Jacobson Hirschman. And she said, every teacher is going to see their roll call, their roll at the beginning of the year in the summer and think like, okay, I got one Jewish kid, and then they're going to find out he's Vietnamese. So that was Jake. Pete, Peter is named after my great grandfather, who was a Ojibwa born on the reservation in northern Wisconsin. He was Peter Lemieux. So Peter is Peter Lemieux Nicholas. And Abe was actually the one that took the most turns. Abe actually, his full name is David Abraham Nicholas. We actually call him after his middle name. David is in honor of my brother. I had a brother who passed away when he was 4, I was 3. He had leukemia. And so we wanted to keep his name in the family. And then the ancestor name I really wanted to use for Abe was on my dad's side of the Lebanese relatives. I had the great grandfather who came to America was Abdullah. And I really loved that name and I wanted an Abdullah, but Julie kind of put her foot down and said after 9/11, we're not naming any kids Abdullah. But one of Abdullah's brothers, one of my great uncles, was Abraham. And it's interesting that both Abdullah and Abraham were referred to people by Abe. So in my mind, I always think I know what it really is. So anyway, so he's David, Abraham, Nicholas. So it's interesting. Everyone always sees me as like the Bible nerd, and they go, "Oh, he picked a bunch of Bible names," which I did, but they're actually all family names as well. And we really struggled if we were going to have a girl, what to come up with the name, because it felt like none of the female ancestors in the family, that their names, the ones we liked the most, there were like scandalous stories that grandparents didn't like them. Like, all right, you can't really do that. So anyway, I love names. I really do.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Any other questions? All right, let me pray for us. God, I thank you for your goodness to us. I thank you for a chance to be together as community, even at a distance. God, I thank you for this scripture. I thank you for looking at the heroes of old and realizing that the people we call heroes didn't always live in the best and most heroic ways. God, help us understand that from the beginning to the end, you are always dealing with your people with grace and mercy. So God, I pray that as sometimes we look at our own lives and think we don't live up to who we should be, who we're called to be, let us be assured of your mercy and grace toward us. And in the same way, God, help us look at each other when we are disappointed or we feel hurt or treated wrongly, to realize that just as you forgive us, so we're called to forgive each other. Help us see, God, that even in our brokenness, even in our flaws, even in taking what look like wrong turns in our lives, you are still writing a story greater than we ever could. So God, I pray that you bless this day, that you bless this week ahead. Let us be able to go out and do your work and your will as you call each and every one of us. God, we thank you for these things, and we pray in Christ's name. Amen. Hey, and I would not be doing my due diligence in order of my family name, since Dawn got us talking about names, to wish all of you a happy St. Nicholas Day today. So the boys have their stockings up by the fireplace. They can see all the goodies. So if
We do too.
you celebrate that, happy St. Nicholas Day. And if you don't, just know that's what today is. So
That's right.
Yeah.
good to see you all today.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
Mhm.
Bye.
Stay safe.
Bye.
Bye.